I do want to talk the New York mayoral race yesterday. Andrew Yang has dropped out. The top three in the ranked choice voting, it is Eric Adams, Maya Wiley, and Catherine Garcia. I wanted to bring on somebody who knows New York politics, who's on the ground doing the work every single day. She is the host of Sunday Civics, the one and only L. Joy Williams. What's up, L. Joy?
Hey, Clay. Only you and the promise of our budding friendship could get me off
Yes.
my couch and from underneath my covers the day after election day.
I know you have been working your soul. Listen, you were a big supporter. It's no secret if y'all don't follow L Joy Williams on social media. It's L Joy Joy Williams. You were a big supporter of Ray McGuire.
Still
I
am. Still
still
am. You
am.
see
Still
my gold, like it's real if I got a gold chain.
am.
Clay, I got a gold chain, ray of hope around my neck. Of course, I'm true to it.
And it's interesting. So I live in Jersey. I live in North Jersey, but I pay taxes in New York. I work in New York. So Jersey City is kind of considered like a secret borough, if you will. So New York means a lot to me. I was stopped and frisked like crazy during the Giuliani and Bloomberg years. So it really does mean a lot to me. So it's an interesting conversation. I want to start it here and I want you to sound off. Um, Eric Adams did amazingly well with the black and Hispanic. I don't know if they call it Hispanic or I say Latin, but did amazing well with black and brown folks in New York. And what's interesting to me is that it kind of reminds me of the 2020 election, the presidential election. I hear this narrative that we want progressive candidates. We want candidates who have a clear, robust black agenda. We want candidates who are going to really change things, not just reform, not just, go back to what it was a few years ago, but really reinvent something. And so I always say this. Secretary Julian Castro had a robust black agenda. Senator Elizabeth Warren had a robust agenda when it came to racial justice, even Senator Cory Booker, but they didn't get the love. And so I look at this race and I see Eric Adams as more of a centrist. And if you're into a centrist, that's cool. But the kind of radical transformation that I want to see of the NYPD specifically, I don't see that in Eric Adams. I posted a clip yesterday of him saying that stop and frisk was a good thing, and you just gotta apply it the right way, as if you can apply a Jim Crow tactic the right way. So, but nonetheless, I think it's important for us to think about black voters and think about, we aren't a monolith and realize that Twitter is not a good temperature of what's really going on with us because Eric Adams was not liked on social media at all, has 8,000 followers on social media and still won. Andrew Yang had over a million, who I wasn't a fan of, and lost. So you're out there on the ground in Brooklyn, L. Joy Williams. What are we missing? What are we getting? What do we need to understand more? Is it generational? Is it, yeah, what is it? What are your thoughts?
Well, there are a lot of components happening at one time that actually would favor a candidate like Eric Adams. And, to your last point of, you know, follower follower count and social media, what comes on, this is something that even in running campaigns nowadays and trying to get candidates, campaigns, and their supporters to understand that if you build a campaign and speak directly to a defined audience on social media, that may not be the voters, well, at least in this instance, we know very much to true that is actually going to come out and vote, right? And so there are a lot of factors, though, in this election to consider. And I don't know, the political scientist in me. I think that the perfect storm of all of these things together, interconnected, is what makes the reality that we have today. So the first thing is voter familiarity. I can never say that word. Familiarity with
Being
candidates.
familiar with knowing them.
Yes, yes. My husband is, I think, the only person I know who can say that word without hesitation. So it is very difficult to convince voters in the midst of a campaign, which is short cycle campaign. I know it seems like campaigns, whether they be presidential, mayoral, or whatever, are this like long, years of a campaign, but it's a short defined time. And it is difficult to convince voters that someone that they have been voting for consistently, right, that you're telling voters that they made a bad decision.
Mm,
So the psychology of that this person or these individuals who you have, voted for in different iterations, different offices that you have supported, the thing, whatever, you are telling me as a voter that decision was wrong. And
mm,
so quite often what I find myself doing with other campaigns and others when they want to, attack or say this one is real, whatever, I was like, keep in mind, you're also telling voters that they made a wrong choice. Right. And
mm,
so, do you want to do that heavy handed, or do you want to say more something like you were betrayed by them, or like you elected them to do this and they didn't do it, or something like that. Right. So there's that, right? Being familiar with the candidates, particularly in the field of a number of candidates. For mayor here in New York City was 13, where there are so many, right? So many choices. There are people like us who live and breathe politics and all that stuff that will research, individual candidates, learn about their profiles or whatever. Other people are like, I know this guy. I voted for him for borough president. I voted for him for state senate. He seems reasonable enough. The things I see on TV and things like that are like what I identify with. That's someone in general, not even considering the people who die hard love and support that candidate, right? Then you have Black and brown voters, as you mentioned. We are very practical, pragmatic voters. People like to put upon us that we vote because of race and we vote because, of feeling and sort of it. No, we are also gaming, right? You're thinking about, well, what are white folks going to do?
mm,
What are they, meaning,
mm,
what the powers that be will allow to happen. And so why I mean, like this other candidate, they ain't gonna let him win, or they ain't gonna
mm,
let, they ain't gonna let her do that. And so then I want my vote to count. I want it to be important. I don't want to back a loser, which is another psychology thing. Voters don't want to back a perceived loser, right? So then I'm gonna go with this entity here. The other two pieces to include in that is our first election using ranked choice voting as the voting method, right? So in addition to the additional choices, there is also, I need to know a little bit more in order to rank. Not that it's hard to rank choices, but that then requires me to know a little bit more about all of the candidates because I need to rank them instead of just picking one. Right. Or and then going down the ballot. It's our municipal election, it's our turnover election here in New York City. So it's not only mayor, it's the entire city council, it's district attorney, which is not a ranked choice voting election, it's
right.
judges, so there's all of that happening at the same time in a space where people in New York are still getting used to a June primary because our primary used to happen in September.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So there's this perfect storm of all of that. And then layer on top of that, as you mentioned, that generational shift of what I call the new progressives, and people who identify as old school liberal, or Black folks who are like, I don't know what these terms mean. I'm a Democrat. And what
Mm,
I know is that I want more money in my pocket, protection for the property I may own, a job, but I also don't want these cops beating, beating us in the street, and telling me what to, and telling me what to do. Right. So there's that sort of balance. And those are who primary voters are.
mm.
Right. And I think Eric Adams said something about that in his remarks last night, where it says, his voters aren't on social media, they're on Social Security.
Mm. So let me
So
ask you
there's
this.
that, all of that together.
Do you think it's promising, though? And for those that don't understand, it's ranked choice voting. So until a candidate reaches 50%, they don't win. So that we're going to go through
50%
another.
plus one.
I'm sorry, plus one. I was get the plus one. So
Mhm.
two. So let me ask you two things. One, I do think it's promising, though. The top two at this point. happen to be a black man and a black woman.
Hmm.
That's very promising to me because everybody the polls have Maya Wiley at number 4. The polls
Hmm.
had Eric Adams, Catherine Garcia, Andrew Yang, and then Maya Wiley. So I see that as being some significant progress, although Eric Adams dominated black areas. What does that say to you that a black man and a black woman are at this point in the top two?
I mean, I think it's great. It's part of what, in my career, I continue to fight for. Like, I want us to have the broad spectrum of experiences, and even in that political calculus, right? I say this in general, that I want Black people to live full lives, right? I want us to be Black excellence. I want us to be trifling. I want us to be mediocre. I
Right.
want
All of
the
it.
full experience without it having your individual life having to be like representative of like the entire, like in a snapshot, right? Like that one white family that sees you in a thing or whatever, they're not like, oh, well, all Black people are like this. They're just like that damn Clay. Right, like it's just like you that one individual. And I don't want the extremes, and I feel that same way about politics, right? Like they're going to be progressive Black candidates, they're going to be Republican and conservative like I want the broad spectrum, because that's who we are as a people, right? Like we are a broad spectrum. And I think the top two that are here in the city now with Eric Adams and Maya Wiley, they are a representation of where our community is. And not only them two as candidates, because there were other candidates, Black candidates in the race
Right.
for mayor. They fully represent, we're talking about Ray McGuire, Diane Morales,
Hmm.
Jocelyn Taylor, right? They fully represent the broad community of Black New Yorkers. And to be able to see that, right? And I tried to quash as much as possible. People would do the conversation, well, we need just one. And I'm like, why? Like,
Hmm.
why not have that broad spectrum represented on the ballot?
All right, so let me ask you this, and you kind of already answered it, but I just want to unpack it a little bit more. For me, stop and frisk is a non-negotiable. For
Hmm.
me, that's a deal breaker. And I know that not Ray, I'm sorry. I know that Eric Adams has been trying to backtrack over the past few months, but I played a clip yesterday. I posted it on my social media of Eric Adams saying that stop and frisk was a good thing, right? That's that is a deal breaker for me. And it really haunted Bloomberg, and it's one of the many reasons why Bloomberg fell apart, because black voters said hell no when it got around nationwide how horrific stop and frisk was. We said hell no. But here is Eric Adams defending stop and frisk and wanting to reinstitute the police plainclothes unit, which was
Hmm.
horrific for black and brown neighborhoods, specifically black neighborhoods. That's why I wanted you here. Uh, I'm a little bit surprised that so many black voters dismiss that, because we collectively know that was horror. Like, it was terrible. I mean, what are your thoughts on that? Like, I thought that was a deal breaker.
Well, a couple of things. One, we are counting on the fact that everybody knows that he said and engaged in that,
Mm,
right? Again, what is trafficked
mm,
on, clips quickly or whatever on social media, because we have immediate access, don't move the same way in traditional papers, in community papers, and in neighborhoods. Now, people could say, oh, so and so said this, and it can be something that, trails on, but in terms of the real impact of how that trickles down into people's households and conversations is different, right? We will traffic on it, and same thing happens in national politics. Like, I talked to people, yesterday at the election night party about debating the voting rights legislation in Congress. Now, we all been talking about it on social media,
nonstop.
doing whatever,
Yeah.
and people are like, "What are you talking about?" Now, these are people who are actively involved in politics, albeit on a
Mm,
local level, and they were like, "Oh, the voting rights bill. Oh yeah, yeah, we need voting rights." Like, but disconnected from the this is going to be debated on the floor, or or in the VP may oversee, like, disconnected from that, right? So I often, and I have someone in my household that helps me to remember, that not everybody is on that sort of daily social media political diet. The other piece is we are missing, particularly in, if you look at the map in terms of where a lot of Eric Adams Black support comes from, Central Brooklyn, Southeast Queens, voter rich, skew generationally older, they own homes, right? So they're concerned about like, they see the crime or responding to the issues that we hear about, people concerned about crime, in their neighborhood. And that was before, right? It was the talking point in the election. Before, it was like, oh, crime is going up. These Black homeowners is like, these kids is out here shooting and doing all kind of craziness, right? You know what I mean? So from their standpoint, maybe we need a little bit of better policing. If you go to precinct council meetings
Mm.
here in the city, like, they are older Black folks, mainly own homes or have been in the communities for a long time. They are working with the police because they are tired of either shootings, fighting, the drag, what they call the drag racing through the street. Like, all of those things are things that a section of Black New Yorkers care about and they want addressed, in addition to, social safety net programs for people who are struggling, jobs, their property tax values, and things of that nature. So the moniker of, progressive, in that, yes, um we want the progressive things of, you know equity in terms of taxes, getting rid of student loan debt, healthcare for all, like, all of those things are things we want. But I also don't want my property tax bill to be this high. I also don't want these kids on these, like, AVs going up and down the street and there's a shooting every weekend. You know what I
Mm.
mean? So, like, all of those things combined, and then when you go to who is actually showing up to vote in a June primary, a ranked choice voting election, even though there are 13, candidates, that's just for mayor, not all of the other pieces on the ballot, including judges. Like, those are all things to take into account. It's not just this one view.
There was a clip that surfaced. Well, it didn't surface, but it was circulating a little bit more yesterday of Eric Adams calling Black Lives Matter protesters in 2018 crazy ass Negroes.
Oy, oy,
And
oy.
but you're right. You're right. Like that, or maybe just crazy Negroes. But you're right. People aren't hearing that. And the other thing that I hear what you're saying, but and maybe it is name recognition, but it's not like Maya Wiley, wants young people to go wild and, like, harass neighborhoods. Like, she appeared to have a really robust plan. I know it's not over yet, but yeah. So let me ask you, what do you? I've had some friends say an Eric Adams administration is going to be even worse than Bloomberg. I've had some friends say it's not going to be that bad. Like, chill out. It'll be somewhere between Dinkins and De Blasio. And for those that don't know, Dinkins was the first Black mayor. He was only one term. He was protested by the NYPD. They rioted. They called him racial slurs. Crime went down for the first time in 30 years. In New York City, when he was mayor, he was kicked out. Giuliani comes in. They say he cleaned everything up, took a lot of credit from Dinkins. Bloomberg comes in, rocks 3 terms, which is kind of crazy. And then we have de Blasio. And to be fair, New Yorkers hate all their mayors. Like, there really isn't a mayor
Yeah.
that New Yorkers like. We
So
hate them
yeah,
all.
I was gonna start that New York City is the only, one of, I wouldn't say the only, but I know New York City is a city where we want our mayor to be like this international, beacon,
Right.
like, sort of stature or whatever, but we'll still cuss you out about trash on our individual
That's
block
right.
if we saw you on the subway. Right.
That's
So it's
right.
like, I want you to be like, why aren't you helping Stacey Abrams in Georgia? And like, and at the same time, like, the trash ain't been picked up on my block in 3 weeks.
Right,
Right.
right.
So,
New
like,
Yorkers hate them all. So, what do you see in Eric Adams? Are people overreacting or are people underreacting
I
for a
think both,
possible Adams? Okay.
honestly. I think both. Honestly, knowing Eric Adams for, for some time, you know, I think I'm of a dual mind, right? On the one hand, I think he has a small percentage of, I want to do something positive and impactful, for the city. And I think sometimes uh the politics in which he operates gets in the way of that. Like, that's my honest assessment, like that he has a, like, I'm going to serve the community, I'm going to do, do whatever, and then what gets in the way is his politics and his, demeanor and sort of all of the other pieces that happen. And that's unfortunate. So I am, on the one hand, optimistic that it'll just be fine. Like, that'll be, like, I would love to be at the, like, going into, if he wins, going into like his third year, and someone asks me like, how was it? And be like, oh, it's fine.
Yeah.
Like,
Hmm.
just like with, De Blasio, who I actually knew and like worked with as well, and have a pretty good relationship, with, and people would ask, like, I would have loved to have been like, it's fine. Like, no,
Right.
like, he did not make any generational transformational change, but at the same time, like, we don't live in a, like, a complete police state. I would count that as fair, but it could go either way, because again, I know that, at least from my experience here with him, is that politics and how he handles and how he manages things gets in the way of what he's trying to achieve. And that would be detrimental, particularly to communities of color in this city.
What do you think went wrong with Mr. Ray McGuire? I interviewed him. He did not want to defund the police. He told me explicitly, I don't want to do that. He was endorsed, not saying that we care about celebrities, but he was endorsed by Spike Lee, Mary J. Blige, Jay-Z. The momentum in the beginning, it was great. He came on my show. He was very nice, very, even when we disagreed, it was great. I had some hope for him in the beginning, and I think he only got 5% thus far of the
Mhm.
vote. What do you think went wrong?
Well, a lot of those things that I talked about, of collapsing together, it's not a situation of it being wrong per se. It's just the environment or the landscape, right?
Mm.
So anytime you're engaging in this, it's like, based upon the landscape, is this going to track, right? And first I would say, like, the reason those of us, right, like, we actively chose to be with his campaign and to be with Ray, even given all this other stuff going on, right? At least for me, like, part of the thing is, I had planned to sit this cycle out, Clay.
Mm,
Like, I
mm.
wasn't going to do any campaign. I was gonna buy a house, try to have a baby, and like sit and rest and like do whatever. And and initially, when he was doing outreach to me, I was just like, here's another damn rich person who want to come
Mhm.
and do something, whatever. And I was like, I at least will give him the time, the space, whatever, to talk or whatever. And it was after meeting and engaging with him, and he's definitely like, one of your daddy's or your uncle's friend kind of person.
Mhm. Yeah,
Like,
yep, yep.
he's that kind of person. But more than that, Clay, he is a decent person. Like, just,
Mm.
I mean, just the, and it's, that doesn't always win you elections, right?
Yeah.
Being a decent human being, someone who really
Mhm.
deeply cares about people, about the city, about like making transformational change. It's not just politics to him. He was just like, I see something wrong. And the way I was raised, I was taught that if you have the ability to do something about it, then you should, right? But all of those things that I mentioned in terms of voters not being familiar with him, right? Only a certain caliber of people in New York City know him, giving his career and his track record, right? And so being able to communicate to people who want to know, well, where have you been? I haven't seen you do anything. And communicating to people, just because you don't see somebody doing anything doesn't mean that they're not doing anything. There's also voters being pragmatic that I talked about. And they're like, well, people don't really know him. I don't know, it was the lane. He's not quite progressive, but not quite conservative. I don't know where he fits in this kind of landscape, kind of situation, kind of thing, right? So, from a voter pragmatic sense, they're just like, yeah, he's nice. Oh, I'd like to hang out with him. Oh, I'd like to, like see what he would do with education or see what he would do with that. But do I trust it enough to give it a vote?
Mm.
Compared to this entity that I know, compared to this, it's that kind of piece. And then a number of analysts and folks are saying now, like someone like him, our campaign would have benefited from a primary in September versus June, so that you have more time for people to get to know him, know his personality, know really what he wants to do. I can be, I'm completely biased on this and in policy because that's what I was responsible for. So like, you would have time to sort of do all of that instead of in a primary. And then, not to mention the impact that the ending of the COVID restriction has had, when majority of this campaign was done via Zoom, right? So
Mm-hmm.
that doesn't lead you to, when you're doing Zoom candidate forums or town halls and things like that, the people showing up are people like you and me, right?
Yeah.
They're not a lot of general voters that you need to get to understand or know him in that way.
Let's take one call before you head out. Let's go to Felicia from New York. What's up, Felicia?
Hello. Yes.
Hey, Felicia. What's up?
Yeah. I just think that I think I saw this morning out of 8.5 million people in New York City, it was a very low turnout.
Mm.
And I think a lot of the people that vote, probably most elderly people, maybe 60, 65 and over. I don't think people between 20 and 40 voted. So this is the result you're going to get. Because I did not vote for Eric Adams for the fact of the stop and frisk. And
Mm.
I know a couple of my friends didn't vote for him, even though we want to stop crime. But no, you can't go back to that. That's
Mm.
unacceptable. So
Mm.
I think all the people that, just like they protest, if you protest but don't vote, you're going to wind up with the same result. So when it's a
Mm.
low turnout, this is what happens. And really, when you go and vote, you see it's mostly older people. So I
Mhm.
think that's where he got most of his votes from.
You're right. I just looked it up. They said the turnout for the New York primary was extremely low.
I think we may hit a million, given, I think in person and absent, in person and early vote, I think is like 770,000, something like that, or above 700,000. And then I think there's another 200,000 in absentee ballots out. But for context, I think there are 3 million um, registered Democrats, because remember, this is a primary, a party primary, right?
Yes,
So there's
exactly.
about 3 million registered Democrats in New York City. If we crack a million people turn out, but then look at our council races, which are like this, only 20 or 18,000 people turn out to vote
Mm.
yesterday,
Mm.
right?
Mm.
So
Mm.
in
Mm.
person and early voting, I think is over 700,000, and then another 200,000 in requested absentee ballots. So that's, and the caller was just right, in terms of who actually shows up. The likely voter in a primary election like this skews older, and that, but you do have instances, because there are progressive movements, new progressive movements happening in the city, like with Working Families Party, DSA, and others who are working more on the local level, like we're talking about those council races. If you can make a significant dent, because only about 18 to 20,000 people are going to come out for a council race, right? You can concentrate and focus on turning out voters in that particular defined district. And now you want a council race, and now replicate that. There's 51 council members, that replicate that in about 15 to 20 districts. You can change the shift of the city council,
Mm.
in that kind of defined, structured way.
Well, I want to thank you for coming on. We'll see what's going to happen. It appears it's going to be Eric Adams, and I hope that he is a great mayor. I hope that he does really good work. I do hope that he makes it a point to talk directly to Black radio. I want to make a correction. He did go on Roland Martin's show. He did go on Charles Blow's show. I was saying that yesterday on the Black News Channel. But as far as Black radio specifically, I hope that moving forward, he makes it a point to talk to Black radio because you can't forget Black radio. But if he ends up being the next mayor, I hope he does good work, and I just hope that policing doesn't get more aggressive and more dangerous in our communities. I really hope that. I really hope we don't see um, a remix version of Stop and Frisk. So
Well,
we'll see. Go ahead. Go ahead.
can I
Final
say
comment. Go
one
ahead.
last thing?
Please.
One last
Please.
thing on that, because I want folks to be clear that stop and frisk is a tool. Stop, question, and frisk is a tool that police still use,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
The distinction was the aggressive nature where in which NYPD was using that tool, and the same thing with the plainclothes unit. Now, I don't believe the plainclothes unit should come back at all, like just
Mm,
at all. Eric
mhm.
Adams' argument is these are tools that just need to be tweaked and used better
Right.
depending on who's in leadership. I
Right.
don't know,
No.
given of like how much power you give law enforcement, how they just find, for me, they just find a way, like how can we still continue to use this like for our benefit kind of thing,
Exactly.
rather than, and which was the same argument that Ray was making, because Ray was very much against the stop and for
Yeah.
stop from first return. And his issue with defund is like you still have Black folks who are concerned about the crime that is, they can see it, right? And
Right.
so to say to them, his view was to say to them, I'm going to financially destabilize the only entity these people know to address this. I I can't get down with that. But what I can say is, yes, I want a 24/7, response to mental health thing. I don't want cops to deal with it at all. I don't want cops in schools. I don't want, like, he would say all of that, but saying I can't tell an 82-year-old Black woman who like only knows that I need to call the police about these shootings in my neighborhood that I'm gonna financially destabilize that entity.